Your plot takes your characters on a journey. One of the characters trips and falls. Does the reader see it? Do the other characters make fun of him or her? Did anyone find out at all? You don't know because you haven't picked out a point of view to narrate from. You might ask yourself how you even got this far. Attack on Table.
Attack on table!
Welcome to Attack on Table, where Ryan and I will behave ourselves a little bit because we have a guest with us tonight, Mr. Matthew Siadak, author of The Backwards Knight and the fantasy anthology, superhero anthology, The Dark Side of Super. So we hope that you will like and subscribe.
And if you guys like what we're doing on here, or you're curious as to how we implement our own advice, you can check out our, monthly Teletales. I write some, Sean writes some. Sometimes we have guests that participate in those. Still haven't figured out how to pivot off of this segue. So
Or Semper Scribe. God, you're bad at this.
Right.
Great.
That's right.
So, what are we talking about tonight, Ryan?
We're talking about how to choose your point of view, and as just a small clarification, because we feel like this is kind of a conversation we can split into two AOTs tonight. We're kind of focused more on first person, third person limited stuff like that, and why you kind of feel like those are the best choices for your particular story.
Agreed. And I'd like to invite the guest to let everybody know, how often do you write in first or third person? What's your favorite? Or do you stick exclusively to one, Matthew?
If you ask me if I'm going to start a story, I always want to do it in first person. I love first person. I love being in there, trapped in the character's mind, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to get into the third person mindset because you have to show the world around the character, and I find that's really hard to do in first person.
Okay.
To implant flavor crystals, as my wife calls them. For me, it's really hard to get out of the character and into the world. So it depends on the story. But I like to bounce between first person and third person limited. I know third person omniscient is out there, but I would probably fall into the trap of head hopping, because that's one of those things that it's out there, but you have to be able to do it, and you have to be able to do it right.
Yeah, and head hopping is definitely something that I want to talk about tonight because I don't hate it as much as I feel like everybody else does, but there are definitely ways that you should do it if you're going to attempt it, and I'd like to get into that a little bit. But for people who don't know, either one of you, what is head hopping? What is and what is bad about it?
I love how you for those of you who don't know, both of you, describe it to me, please.
I can see how that came
off. Is when you get every character's input and you kind of bounce from character to character in the middle of a scene, and that could be hard to follow if it's not done right. And
Right.
that's the key part. There's a lot of writing rules out there, but if you can do it right, you can break them.
Well, it's not just within a scene; it's basically across the narrative.
Right.
I can see how in a scene would be really hard to
I feel
focus
like
in on.
That's the mortal sin that people focus on a whole lot, but I've been called out for head hopping on the first draft of the book I'm working on right now because there's scenes that happen between my two main characters that sometimes the other one isn't around for. So given that most of the story kind of fits around David, stuff happens to Kane while David's sleeping. I get kind of stuck on figuring out, I don't want to make a whole new chapter, for example, to switch to Kane's POV and then end the chapter to go back just because of a conversation. So what advice would either of you have to help me out with cleaning that up? Because I clearly struggle with it.
I'll let our guest go first.
So for me, I ran it, I think, into a little bit of a similar issue with the Backwards Night. You have three main characters, Orin, Golf, and Layla, and they each have their own point of view throughout the book, but there's scenes where they exist together. And I had a hard time weaving together, what happens when and how are these characters, they're in the same scene and not head hopping or not interjecting new chapters. And it was a little bit difficult, but I would have to use some scene breaks. Like when the chapter starts, say, in Orin's perspective, and something happens that forces it to another character's perspective, I would use a scene break. And that way you have that clear delineation. It's not necessarily a chapter break because the story is still in the same part, but you're changing something that the reader needs to be aware of.
Okay, so to you, in your mind, a scene break is a valid way to do that. Maybe not something that should be thrown in willy-nilly, but if you've got to see things from a different angle during, let's say, a barroom brawl or something,
right?
It'd be useful. That's almost as like if it were a movie, the camera switching to being behind another one of your characters.
Exactly.
Okay, and I agree with you there.
Yeah, I am of a completely different school of thought in regards to that kind of stuff.
Here comes the purist.
I don't know if I'm a purist, but
wax poetic, Ryan.
I do prefer a more classic adventural kind of approach to POV. I don't like hopping around. I feel like there's something to be said about being put in the shoes of a person and then not being able to know things or feelings or the past of someone else within that person's vicinity, and having to imply things or absorb things based on their actions or the words they've said, and that little bit of mystery of like, I don't actually know anything about this person. I'm just taking some gut feeling on faith that they're in, they're working for me or with me or whatever. And so in regards to like your situation, Sean, like I feel like that story should just kind of revolve around David, right? That's the main character's name. David. I think it's David.
What's the matter with Elda, and why don't you like her?
It's not that I don't like the character.
Why isn't
I just
Kane important enough to you to get a point of view?
It's just I feel like particularly with your story, it's very I don't want to say like action, like make it out like it's John Wick, but it's very like progressively moving forward in a quickened pace, just because of like how things unfold and the things they get into, that you're constantly moving in that direction. And I feel like it's just better to stay in the pocket of that person. It creates like a sense of unease because the reader, the character, doesn't know everything.
That doesn't change from head hopping.
Well, it can though, because you're from taking on the personality of a different character, you're observing things, you're relaying information that person feels or may be plotting inside their own head that the original character does not know about. And so it's just like, to me, I get the sense of it. I understand the importance of head hopping sometimes, but I prefer a story where it's just like I'm kind of in the dark alongside the main character.
Okay, so Ryan won't buy my book. Whatever.
I will to support you.
No, I don't want your support. No thanks.
So, and I get that, but there's some books that, again, leaning on my own, The Backwards Night, you have three main characters because their stories all start in distinctly different places. And so there's going to be stuff that happens for each of them, and they're eventually going to meet up. Otherwise, you might as well write three different novels. But when they meet up, there's a certain chapter where Orn and Layla are adventuring together, and Orn goes to bed, and Layla is suspicious of him. So you've had her point of view up to this point, and when he retires, you get her point of view watching him as he sleeps, waiting for him to do something.
Okay.
If he's pretending to sleep or something like that, which is similar to what you talked about, I think. But it's one of those things that it's not worth a chapter break because it's still the same scene, but it's a scene change to show you, okay, Layla's here. you've had her suspicion from her point of views, and now you see how she's reacting to the other character. And there are some books that do great from single points of view, but I like multiple points of view. I like seeing what the characters think.
Well, to your point, that particular doing something like that particularly allows you to convey an extra scene of tension
Right.
that otherwise would be missed. Because it's like, if you write that from the dude's perspective, like he's just like, oh, everything's fine, I'm gonna go to bed.
Right.
You know,
The end.
so yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So one thing that I found when I was doing some research on this of like questions to ask yourself when selecting POV, is how much do you want the reader to know? Like in just a given circumstance, what should the reader know? What should the reader not know? And what kind of an experience do you want them to have? And those are good guide rails, I think, to really think about when you, as an author or screenwriter, whatever you are getting ready to write your story down and figure out how to tell it. Because what you were saying earlier at the beginning, Matthew, you like prefer first person point of view because that lets you really get inside the head of your character. And I would imagine it's a lot easier to convey like the deep internal emotions and thought processes of that character. Where for what kind of story you prefer writing fantasy, right?
Right. So I have an example of that in The Dark Side of Super. It's an anthology / novella that's told in 11 parts. 9 of the stories are told in third person. I chose 2 of the stories specifically to write in first person. The first one is the Man in the Mirror. It features M. You meet M riding on a bus, staring out at the city, and I wanted to impart how disconnected M feels from their life, from their friends, from their work. And doing that in third person is really hard. But doing it in first person to me is you can really stress, the stress of the character. And my editor warned me with the second story, because you have a second story in this collection that's first person, you really have to differentiate the 2 first person point of view characters. Otherwise, people are going to think that character's coming back.
Okay.
And in that particular story, and without giving spoilers, I did differentiate it. It's a completely tonal shift. And the reason that is in first person, because you start with the character basically in a medical induced coma and still aware of the world.
Okay.
And so you can't do that in third person either. So I had to lean on the first person for both of those, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can see why you picked that.
Yeah, first person is a more like a cerebral approach to storytelling. You also have to, like, when you're sitting down getting ready to tell a story and you're trying to figure out this big question we're all trying to tackle, you have to ask yourself, what is it I want to do, and how easy is it for me to achieve those things in this point of view versus that one? If we go with Matthew's example, there are certain things that you can convey a multitude of ways, a multitude of times from first person. You can't really do from outside that, because then it starts to feel stale. It feels like the narrator is just repeating themselves. Whereas when you're inside someone's head, there's a lot of ways you can kind of convey
it's a lot more intimate
or concern. Yeah.
That level of intimacy. Would either of you say that you know how there's stories where it's driven by the plot and there's stories where it's driven by the characters? Maybe there would be a good divide of first person is for those character driven stories and third person is for a more plot driven story, where how the characters are feeling or thinking isn't necessarily like meant to be front of the reader's mind so much, so that you can kind of do the third person and focus on what's happening around them? Or do you think that that's not a good rule of thumb?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. It's one of those things that in talking with my editor, The Backwards Knight is a very, very character-driven story. But because it's multiple characters, I leaned on third person. And for me, a fantasy world, because you need to do world building, you need to differentiate how it is. It's easier to do that, to give those details in third person.
Okay.
So I think it's a case by case basis, but for me, it's really comes down to the story being told and how you need to tell it.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, fantasy is a great example for that, because you do have so much world building and lore and background that you have to kind of, recognize or detail in some fashion, and third person suits that far better. But you don't have to like abandon first person completely. Like, there's great moments where you can slip into first person. Hopefully it's a scene cut. You're not just doing it randomly. But yeah, like you can slip into it to kind of experience the world or a past memory or something from that person's perspective, so that you get that intimate moment, and then we can break from that and go back to the larger world at hand.
Yeah, I could see me really liking that if it was done well, like with a scene.
Well, that's what I did, like with Hath and Harrow. Like, I had like an outside perspective, and like when I felt like there's a moment where I need people to kind of understand this character a little bit better, I like had him relive past trauma through dreams, and you can experience those in first person
through a dream. Okay. What do you think about that, Matthew? Like swapping from third to first?
I would have a hard time with that. I had a hard time with it, even doing it from different story to different story, and the dark side is super. I mean, because once I go to first person, I want to stick there. I love reading first person. I love writing it because it's a lot faster, because you can just let the words flow, because you're in that character, you become that character. But again, it's not my strength, and I recognize that, and I that's why I had to work through building up my third person capability.
I gotcha. I when I was way back, when I was just first dipping my foot into writing, I enjoyed first person more. I think though that I tend to include a lot of movement and action in the stories that I write, and I just always think of it in such a way that I like the third person view in my head of watching it all. I just need to be more careful about, because I also like having more than just one special character. Like Harry Potter, we don't need to be in Ron and Hermione's head that much.
Right.
Harry Potter's seeing most of the important events of what's going on. He's finding out about them firsthand the same time everybody else is, or those people who experienced it are relaying it to him. Like every part of the plot goes through him. So that could have, in my mind, been a first person story. I think it was written well, don't get me wrong, but having that like one character that everything kind of happens to and happens because of is a good opportunity for your story to be like a first person and really like get the reader in their head and to get to know them. I like a bigger cast.
So do I.
And yeah, because you get to have those different relationships, and there's more opportunities for more readers to kind of sync up with them.
It's something for everybody after a fashion.
Yeah, I think if you
ideally
boil it down to like, what is your story like actually about, and kind of use that as a starting point, because like Sean said, Harry Potter is about Harry Potter. But if we take the same vein, like Game of Thrones, it's not about anyone. It's about like a political system. It's about world governments, colliding, and you have to be able to not only bounce around from perspective, but like regions and that kind of stuff just doesn't work if you're constantly in everybody's head. So like being third person is probably the best thing you could do in those situations.
Yeah. I also wanted to go all the way back and agree with you that like third person omniscient is it, to me that feels really disconnected. And with that, like I feel like it had its time way back in the day, and I feel like it's something that would be very hard to get written for people to really feel connected to nowadays. Because if you can see everything, then it's really hard to get too close to one thing if you're doing third person omniscient correctly. I want to ask you another question, Matthew, that's sort of an off tangent. We were talking about it earlier, because usually we try to pick something we don't like about this subject. And I have no issues with first person, but I do have a bone to pick with first person present tense. How do you feel about it?
I can't do it. I have a hard time reading it.
Okay.
I have a couple stories I've read in it that I can get into, but it takes a little bit more effort to get started.
It ruins me. And I don't want to insult anybody who writes and reads and loves it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not for me. I
Right.
struggle
Like
with it.
to each their own. It's like it's second person too. That is really hard to read.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah.
Like really hard to read.
I think first person present tense is good for short stories, because I don't think it's necessarily the tense that you're dealing with or the point of view that's the problem. I think it's just the length in which you're in that seat that can be problematic.
I guess
Either due to the
agree.
writer's creativity or just
Yeah.
reading that.
It's that
for that
I am
long.
doing this, now I am doing that. Like, I'm doing a lot. I don't like I don't want to. Yeah, I get it. I'm too lazy. But second person, oh my god, anybody who tries doing that, like, my hat's off to you for bravery, but
I tried my hand at it once. Never again.
it ruined my whole weekend. Like,
Ruined my whole weekend.
uh,
I stopped writing. I quit. I just quit.
I don't. Matthew, Ryan, anybody got anything else that they really have to say as far as like a rule or any advice for a new author who's kind of fiddling with that kind of a question?
It really comes down to is you have to find where your strengths are and you have to lean on them. Most of these writing rules, they're there for a reason, but as we're taught in school, how many famous writers broke those rules? And they did it because they knew how to do it. They knew how to lean on their strengths and to buck conventions. And that's what it comes down to. Find the rules that work for you and find the ones you can break.
Yeah.
And if you can do it and you do it right, you're going to win.
The key there,
I would
do
say
it right.
Yeah.
I would say I would agree with that. I think I don't think it's necessarily that people like know how to do something. I think it's just a mastery of your own creativity and not being afraid to like get in the mix because you know that you're going to be able to write your way out of it. So like I think it's just if you want to try new things, but have the wisdom to know when it's not working,
Right.
and find the ripcord.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ryan, you said that we had a Dear Duncan for this episode, right?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and switch over to the studio. Through the power of the
Vested in
internet.
me.
And our friends at NJC Printing and our lovely new studio overlay here. If you guys like what you see from the channel, hit them up. They might be able to help you out with signage or anything like that for like book signings and stuff. We have Dear Duncan from, well, I'll read that last. I'm just going to read it. Dear Duncan, my protagonist keeps making bad decisions. I originally thought this was realistic characterization. My critique group thinks he's an idiot. Where is the line between flawed and frustrating? Defending my fool. I'll kick that off with Matthew.
All right. So, again, I'm going to lean a little bit on my own writing here. In The Backwards Night, Orn, the titular character, is a normal person thrust into an abnormal situation. He's self-trained. He's out there doing the best he can, but he makes mistakes. And the way my editor called it is he's literally just a real person. He's not going to know all the answers, but he's going to do what he can to make up for it. And to me, there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody's going to be perfect. If I wanted to tell a heroic fantasy, I would, but there's certain times you just have to have characters, to me, that are down to earth and real. So if your character if you're pushing it too far, okay, maybe take that with a grain of salt. But if that character feels real to you as the author, you need to run with it, and get a second opinion. I mean, there's no shortage of those in the writing community.
I guess that's a good point. Your critique group could be full of people who only like to write and read geniuses. I guess where's the line between being a jester and being a main character?
So for me, if the character is failing upwards too much, that's a line. You're crossing line at that point. But if they are, for an author, Joe Abercrombie, his books, they're dark fantasy, grim dark fantasy, and the characters constantly make wrong choices, but they do it in a very human way. Temptation, they give into it. They try to better themselves, and then they fall flat in their face. And it's a hard read, but it's a realistic read. I mean, how many people out there? It's self-control. Some people have a problem with it. It's not unrealistic.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations that Sean and I keep wishing like we could talk to the person that sends this stuff, because my question is like, what do you mean by bad decisions?
Right.
Like, do you just mean like the wrong one, or they're just making ones that turn out poorly? And...
like they walk up to a random person and slap them. Yeah, that's a bad decision. Or they tried to do something and failed.
Yeah. I think failure is not necessarily a bad decision. It's just a bad execution. And I agree with Matthew. There's nothing wrong with a less than genius level character. I think that the problem becomes is the perception of your character not what you were envisioning.
Right.
And then that can come down to maybe just fixing how he reacts to these decisions, or how lucky he is that the decision didn't absolutely blow up in its face. And that stuff can get frustrating for readers, where it's just like, I'm okay with him making bad choices, but if he's not suffering the consequences, what the hell are we doing?
If he has too much plot armor, so to speak.
I think the mix between, lack of consequences, failing upwards, and everything like that, it's probably what they meant by making bad decisions, or too many happy accidents or something. It's really vague. I'm reading it right now, and I'm looking for how else to see that.
This would be a great discussion.
Yeah.
And right now we have a very one-sided answer, or question to answer.
Yeah, first name defending, last name my fool.
Come on to the show. Defend your question.
Right. And your fool.
Right. Right. You could do both with the same podcast. Here on Fitz of Writing.
Well, if you guys enjoyed that and you want to support the channel, we also have a Reddit community called the Inkwell Society. We post a bunch of stuff on there. We're open to having conversations. It's a great place to communicate with us directly. Maybe even Sir Dr. Duncan Cackleworth, Esquire, if he ever shows up. Please don't fire me.
He's very busy. Okay.
And dead air, yeah. I thought someone would pick up the ball there.
I'm sorry.
What? You're the one who runs Reddit.
Not you, Matthew. Not you.
What the hell am I supposed to say? Matthew. God, shut up, Ryan. Matthew, would you like to talk a little bit about your stories and where people can follow you, find your books?
Certainly. I have The Backwards Knight, a classic fantasy adventure with some eldritch horror undertones. Featuring a snarky knight, a stabby princess, and a farm boy marked by magic. What could go wrong? And it turns out that's actually quite a bit. Then there's The Dark Side of Super, which is an interconnected collection of dark, gritty, superpowered shorts where each story features a superpower, and those powers come with a cost, be it mental, physical, emotional, or otherwise. They're available pretty much everywhere books are sold, including signed copies through me with potential swag, bookmark stickers. I have prints of the artwork that my wife did, and The Dark Side of Super is also out in audiobook format, so if you like to listen, it's out there.
Great.
Damn, Matthew, can we hire you to write our ad copy? Jesus Christ, that was professional. Sean and I are just struggling here. Like,
I'm trying to bounce off of you, and every time I do, there's like a 2-second delay I have to cut out in editing.
I have trained, I practiced that a lot. My wife and I do Gen Con, and you get like 3 seconds with people who stop to take a look. So
Maybe that's our problem. We don't practice enough, Sean.
I know. Well, I mean, you go start rattling off or whatever. Like, if I've got that much to say, I'm gonna grab your coat, and I'm not gonna let you walk away until I finish with it. Like, I worked very hard on this.
Yeah. You're gonna sit here and listen to it. You'll buy my book if I let you.
If I let you. Okay, that's
All right,
enough of that.
I just want to remind everyone, check out our monthly Telltales. You know, we post them every Tuesday. I forget which one's running right now, but you can find it on our Facebook page. One last question before we go. Sean,
Okay.
how do we end these?
Perspectively.